right, good evening. Hello, everybody. This is Susan Kokinda with LaRouchePAC's Saturday Night Class Series. Tonight, I am very happy to host the second class that Chuck Park is going to be presenting on the culture that shaped our fight for independence. Before we start, I want to make note of what was probably the most widely heralded political event of the presidential campaign this week, which was Tucker Carlson's takedown of a number of the presidential campaigns of a number of candidates by doing something extremely diabolical. He asked them the kinds of questions that a normal human being might actually ask a candidate, and they failed miserably. And what it underscored, I think, is that you really cannot be a one-dimensional creation of a political class or an ideology and still be qualified to accede to the most powerful office in our republic. These people like Pence and DeSantis and others, they're simply hollow men who really are nothing than artificial constructs. And Tucker Carlson, I think, did a very good job in illuminating that for a whole lot of Americans. If you contrast that to the character and the intellectual power of our founding fathers and those who came before them in the run-up to our fight for independence, you see something obviously quite different. Because how could it be otherwise? These people created something completely new, a form of government which had never existed before, and which still exists today, almost 250 years later. And they were able to do that because they immersed themselves in a culture which constantly asked the question, what is the nature of man? And celebrated the answer that we are imago Dei, in the image of the Creator. And the culture which spawned such discussion and such men is something which is too little understood to this day and urgently needed to restore to our political discussion and the quality of political leadership that we're going to need to get through these very perilous times. So without any further introduction, I want to introduce Chuck and let him take it away.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chuck Park, LaRouchePAC. The subject is the culture that shaped the fight for independence. A colleague of mine reminded me of a statement that LaRouche made, which I think is very relevant for the discussion today, where LaRouche had said, we represent the future that doesn't exist yet. And if you think of the Renaissance, the American Revolution, that was the challenge. Dante took the Italian language, which was backward, and developed it into a beautiful language that conveyed beautiful ideas and conceptual ideas that transformed the thinking capacity of the population from the 13th century on. And similar in what I was going through in the first class, when I referenced the role of key individuals like Jonathan Swift and John Gay, who represented the faction fighting the British oligarchical takeover of Great Britain, the Anglo-Dutch Venetian faction that took over Great Britain. These leaders, like Swift and Gay and others, understood the fundamental principle. They understood that they were up against a Satanic world outlook that said human beings are animals. It was represented by the Hobbesian philosophy, which says literally that man is a beast man. Nothing distinguishes man from the animal. They had the task then of how to convey that fight to the broader population, first in England and then in America, and do it in a way which would be effective. And so you had creation of works of genius that didn't exist before. You had Jonathan Swift and the Gulliver's Travels, which was, he chose satire and humor, but which was poignant, which was that to the point of what is the difference, opposing reason to the bestial world outlook. John Gay, just ridiculed the Churchill Montagu crowd that represented the pro-British Empire faction in his creation of what's called the Beggar's Opera. Now, what I wanted to go into is two other aspects of this battle. And I would encourage people, if you hadn't seen the first class, definitely go back and watch it, because it is a single concept. It's just I couldn't do it all in one class. So the two areas I wanted to reference are theater and art, American art. And Jonathan Swift and his network set up a society called the Scriblera Society, which lasted for about 40 years. And it was sort of a seminal point for these ideas to be brought into America after their battle in Great Britain. So in the role of theater, it was directly the Swift networks that introduced theater into America. You had, for a good example, with John Gay, who wrote The Beggar's Opera. When he first wanted to produce this, I think it was 1728, the head of the major theater in Great Britain was an ally of the Churchill Montagu oligarchical faction. He wouldn't produce it. But Gay was able to go to an ally of the Scriblera Society, a guy named John Rich, who owned the Lincoln Theater at that time, Fields Theater, and produced it. This became the longest playing opera theater in British history at the time. So it shouldn't be any surprise that when theater was first introduced into the United States in 1750, the first play that was produced in New York was The Beggar's Opera, and very, very popular at the time. 2 years later, you had an acting family called the Hallam family, who moved to America, and they performed, the first play they performed was in Williamsburg, Virginia, which was The Merchant of Venice. So they were, going for the highest level of culture to be brought into the Americas at the time. The Hallams had the father and the son and the whole family actually of actors were connected to John Rich and performed at his theater. So they were deployed. They were absolutely deployed. Later, Lewis Hallam, Jr. opened a theater in New York, and he produced or performed the first American authored play entitled The Prince of Parthia. Now, this play was written by Thomas Godfrey, who was the son of the inventor who had worked with Benjamin Franklin and John Logan. The influence of Shakespeare in this play, the Prince of Parthia, was direct. You have one of the early scenes in this play is direct reflection of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar introduction, where the two minor characters are referencing how fickle the population is. They change their views on the drop of a hat, which is a central theme of Shakespeare's play. The famous painter, Charles Wilson Peale, you can show the picture on this if you like, who was an American artist and scientist. He represented in his art, and I'm going to develop this a little bit more as we go along, all the great achievements that were going on in science, in artistic development. And he has a famous picture, which you see there, of Nancy Hallam. This is in 1771, performing the key role in the Shakespeare play Cymbeline. Now, I want to shift from there, so I give you a sense that this was a culture that was being fostered in the United States and with good attendance, and I'll come back to that. In the artistic field, it's quite extraordinary, because instead of the Renaissance networks or the Leibniz networks in Great Britain deploying into America, Ben Franklin organized reversed the process. What he did is that in 1760, he deployed a young American genius named Benjamin West to London and Italy to study. Benjamin West never returned to the United States, but he influenced the next 3 generations of American artists. And I'll come back to that also. Yeah, there's Benjamin West. And one of the first things that Benjamin West did when he was very young is he went to Italy. He studied all the great Renaissance painters. He was a student of a fellow named Anton Raphael Mengs, who himself was a student of a great German scholar in antiquity named Johann Winckelmann. And that's another whole story, because there was a parallel development going on in the 1730s, 40s, and 50s in Germany of the Leibnizian networks and the anti-British oligarchical faction, but that's another story for another time. When West returned to London, he co-founded in 1768 the Royal Academy of Arts, and he went on later to become the president of it. It was a very important role. If you reflect on the depth of the classical culture, which was shaping the thinking of the American people before a revolution, a good example of that is that in 1756, West did one of his first paintings. It was done from an engraving that he had been given of the death of Socrates. So the most profound concepts in history was what the subject matter were of the greatest thinkers in our country at the time. The other key element of West is that he overturned the edict of the British Empire of what painting could do and couldn't do. So for up until the time of West came into Great Britain, any figures that were portrayed, of current history, you had to portray those figures in Roman garb, in togas, and the whole shebang. And West was committed to allowing the American people to reflect on, take pride in their own history by giving an accurate representation of the historical events, so it was relevant to them at their time. And what he did is in 1770, West really revolutionized art by painting a scene from the French and Indian War portraying the death of Captain Wolfe in the native garb and the native background of America at the time. And this was a beginning of a series of revolutions in the fact that you portrayed reality, not some mythicized concept of empire, and everything heroic goes back to the Roman Empire and probably to Babylon. I don't know. West followed this up in 1771 by a painting that was commissioned by William Penn, the son of William Penn, actually, which was celebrating Penn's treaty with the Indians. So you're starting to see he's portraying the American history and key players in shaping the American history, and it's done in classical style, beautiful figures, proportioned, perspective, it's all there, but it's unique to art at the time. Then in 1805, Benjamin West painted his famous portrayal of our scientific genius, Ben Franklin, by painting the picture of Ben Franklin drawing electricity from the sky. Now, many people have seen this, but again, he understood the unique genius, the unique role in advancing science for all humanity, and he put it into, he captured it for posterity, right? In the same year, Charles Wilson Peale, he was a student of West and a sculptor named William Rush. He founded the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And Benjamin West expressed the following sentiment in a letter to the newly formed academy, which he had been made an honorary member of, even though he was in Great Britain at the time. What West said was, quote, he envisioned the United States as an empire bursting into magnitude of the first order, with Philadelphia taking the role of Athens, where the fine arts would flourish thanks to the eminent men of her greatly distinguished academy. So they were understanding the challenge and the role they were playing in creating a new direction for humanity. I want to now go into a little bit of Charles Wilson Peale, because he was just a phenomenal individual. He was a scientist, he was a philosopher, he was a painter. He was quite extraordinary. Anyway, Charles Wilson Peale was born in Delaware in 1741. When he was 23 years old, he joined the Sons of Liberty. Peale had studied art in London under Benjamin West, and he used Leonardo da Vinci's treatise on painting as one of his major treatises of what real painting was. Leonardo da Vinci developed the modern concept of, he utilized the modern concept of perspective, but also blurring the lines, making it more real. It's not just figures or things like that. This is in 1772. And he also, Charles Wilson Peale directly modeled a lot of his works on Raphael. And matter of fact, his sons were named Rembrandt, Raphael, etc. He named them all after classical artists. In 1772, 2 years after returning from his studies with Benjamin West, Peale painted a miniature portrait of George Washington, and then another one of Martha Washington, that Washington wore as a locket around his neck for the rest of his life. That was in 1772. Peale, from very early on, he recognized the revolutionary role that America was destined to play in world history. He dedicated his life through his paintings to preserve for posterity the individuals and events that were shaping that revolution in his lifetime. Peale served actually with George Washington in the two crossings of the Delaware in 1777. And 2 years later, he painted a picture of Washington at the Battle of Princeton, which was the major turning point. This is the second time that Washington went across the Delaware, outflanked the British and the Hessians, and took their supplies and made it clear that the first time he went across wasn't a fluke. So Wilson Peale preserved that for posterity, for the individuals and events that were shaping the revolution of his lifetime. Peale then served, he painted every major figure, like Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton, but plus lesser known figures who played a role in the formation of our nation all the way up to the 1820s. You can just about every major figure and minor figure, you can find a portrait from Charles Wilson Peale. Peale and his sons also fostered great projects that helped develop the culture and the scientific advancement in America. And Peale had been elected in 1786 to the American Philosophical Society. The society in 1806 to 1808 funded the excavation of the remains of the first mastodon discovered in upstate New York. Now, Peale captured his direction. He directed the entire excavation. He captured that in a famous painting called The Exhumation of the Mastodon. And the bones were exhibited at the Peale Museum, which he set up. I'll come back to that in a minute, which was established by Peale in 1784. His son then toured with some of these huge, dinosaur bones throughout all of Europe, bringing that. And it was the first actual discovery of a prehistoric animal of that size in America. The Peel Museum, which he later renamed the Philadelphia Museum, it was made easily affordable to the general public because Peel was committed to encourage the population's enthusiasm for the sciences. And the museum housed specimens of birds, insects, flowers, butterflies, collected from all over America. And he had representatives who were on ships going to China, to India, to other parts of the world, who then sent him specimens. All of it were put in his museum. The entirety of the specimens from the Lewis and Clark exposition, for example, were housed in the museum, and his sons participated in and collected rarities from expositions to the Colorado Rockies and South America. They also made paintings of the new flowers and the new specimens they were discovering. This is Charles Wilson Peel sort of giving you an introduction to his museum, which was set up right next to Independence Hall when it was first set up. Peel offered lectures from his faculty of scientists, mostly drawn from the American Philosophical Society, and musical concerts. Because Peel actually kept an organ in the museum because he thought that the best way to educate the public was to unite art and science to show the harmony of the universe. And this is a quote from Peel. These are not me, putting words in his mouth. That was his conception. That's why he did it. So you had complete overthrow of any oligarchical concept that science and art are for the elite. No, this was brought to the general public, colonists in our country, to foster their creative development, inspire their imagination, and develop it. The influence of Benjamin West, he lived from 1738 to 1823, was to shape American art culture well into the period beyond the American Civil War. Some of his most famous students, some of which you might have heard of, were Robert Fulton, who was a painter and an inventor of the steamboat; William Dunlap, a painter and also a major figure in promoting theater in America; Thomas Sully, who lived from 1783 to 1872. He was famous for his portraits in 1824 of John Quincy Adams, who became president that year, and General Lafayette. It was the last time Lafayette was able to come back and tour the United States. Samuel Morse was the painter and developer of the telegraph and Morse code. And the one American painter that a lot of Americans probably do know is John Trumbull. John Trumbull painted the Declaration of Independence, the surrender of General Burgoyne, the surrender of Lord Cornwallis, and George Washington resigning his commission, all of which can be seen adorning the rotunda of the United States Capitol today. So these great events were put together by John Trumbull, a student of Benjamin West, for the celebration of our victory for humanity. And there's an excerpt from a letter that John Trumbull wrote to Ben Franklin in 1789, which I think captures the real revolutionary spirit that motivated the actions of our forefathers back then. And I'm going to quote this. Trumbull says, "I've begun a series of pictures of the great events of the American Revolution. I hope by confining my pencil to subjects so interesting to human nature that I shall not only meet the appropriation of my country, but that I may render some distant service to posterity." So they were thinking, how do we preserve for generations to come, like our generation, the actual true participants in the historic events that we were participating in, and make it real? And this is actually unique in any revolution that I know of, except for some of the work that was done around the Renaissance. So my basic point is that this nation was founded on the idea that genius exists, that it must be cherished, that we must fight for the right for it to flourish, And institutions must be created that nourish its development, and government instituted that promotes genius among its people and protects their creations for posterity. I actually know, and I think I can prove at the end of this, a couple other things I'm about to say, that this was the conscious understanding of the role of genius in creating the future of humanity. And it was fought for. Government was instituted to allow it to occur. We put in measures to protect it, which we have to today do this very importantly. And it was what made our revolution successful. So this is our true history, and it's a gift from our forefathers, a gift that requires us to reach down and bring forth that genius in us today, to ensure that our forefathers did not create in vain, and that spark of genius can be carried forward for all humanity in the future. So our great world historic genius, the Prometheus of his age, Ben Franklin, understood this very explicitly, very explicitly. And what I want to do is that it's a little bit long, but I think it's worth reading for people to think about, because it was written, it's a poem written by Ben Franklin. It's entitled Genius and a Regular Ode. And hopefully you can survive my reading of this, but I'll go for it. Let there be light, the Almighty spoke. Observant of the great command, all should the soul supreme invoke science to spread o'er every land. Science, whom superior powers are given, the friend of man and delegate of heaven. Let there be light, the angelic throng, silent, survey the spacious void, then echoed in their cheerful song, still in Jehovah's praise employed, serving in truth the universal cause, and sang, let there be light, and light there was. Homer, stand forth. Thy genius known, to thee we every tribute pay. Thy fancy raised the poet's throne, which future ages shall obey. By thee full many a realm was taught to glow, but Shakespeare tears the laurel from thy brow. Dryden, to Philip's son of Fane has reared, a temple stronger than the hero's name. Though like a god by some he was revered, the bard has more illustrious made his fame. Hearest thou? Can thy mind refrain from applauding Dryden's strain? Earth, the sweetest airs resounding, skies, the sweetest airs rebounding, ambition for a moment sinks to rest, and valor droops, reposed on beauty's breast. Pope, on the bust of Dryden still recline, may ye still flourish in eternal flame, till Haley shall assert an equal name. Congreve, be silent. Sheridan, we hear. We smile with steel, but Addison revere. Siddons, we own thy imitative powers are truly great, but is not Mars ours? Painting, may the canvas glow. Let thy vivid colors show what nature has expressed. Display the likeness bold, alive. Let art with nature fairly strive, and both will bow to west. Patriot, philosopher, and sage, immortal be thy name. Virtue shall spread thy worth through every age, and wisdom celebrate thy fame. In counsel wise, firm in debate, thy virtue oft preserved each state. Those states in knowledge flourishing and free shall yield the palm of genius still to thee. Genius, stand forth. With thee conduct the arts. To thee obedient may they ever prove. Correct our matters, dignify our hearts, and bind us in the bands of genuine love. So I don't think people knew that Franklin was really a poet also, but he gets right to the essence of what I think I hopefully conveyed was the basis for the development of the culture that allowed our nation to rise up to the challenge, overcome overwhelming odds, and secure, our existence now we have that challenge in the future. And a lot of the people that he refers into here were poets and artists at the time. Siddons was a famous actress. Morris was an American actor. But anyway, I'm going to sort of leave it there. Open it up for discussion because I have plenty of time for discussion. I went a little bit quicker than I thought I would.